For his first appearance here, Congressman John Duncan, Jr., representing the great state of Tennessee, and the House of Representatives, is on the line. Congressman Duncan, happy Monday to you. Welcome aboard, sir. How are you?
Well, fine, Mike. Thank you very much. Over these last several months, I've become a big fan of yours on XM Radio, and I really appreciate your show and what you do.
Well, thank you very much. I was reading up on your bio, and I am a fan of yours.
Well, thank you. I also am glad you promote the American Conservative magazine, the Chronicles, and things like that, because I've written several articles for both of those magazines. But you probably know that Ron Paul and I are still the only two Republicans left who voted against the war in Iraq.
I did know that. Now, Congressman Jones joined you later in efforts to try and stop it, but you and Congressman Paul are the only two left. Now, of course, Congressman Paul is leaving, and you're not.
Right. And Walter Jones is not, too. In fact, Walter is one of my best friends, too. But when I go back to Washington tomorrow, I'm going to do a tribute on the floor of the House to Ron Paul. And in fact, I was one of those that was in the video at the Republican convention paying tribute to him. But I think your listeners probably would be interested to know that when I voted against the war in Iraq, it was probably, without question, the most unpopular vote I ever cast for about 3 or 4 years. But slowly, very slowly, what was one of the most unpopular now has become one of the most popular votes I ever cast.
Yeah, and if only there had been more cooler heads that had prevailed, and if only you and Congressman Paul and the Democrats that opposed it, like Congressman Kucinich, had been able to persuade their colleagues that this was not in the interest of the United States. Furthermore, the authorization to use military force, which is one of the things that Congressman Paul vehemently opposed as being patently unconstitutional, that if you let that cat out of the bag, well, then you'd be given license to these wars in the future, right?
Well, you're exactly right, and I'll tell you, most of these wars have been far more about money and power than they have been about any real threat to our security. In fact, I remember going to briefings for the first Gulf War, and we heard from General Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell and others about how dangerous Saddam Hussein's elite troops were, and then I watched them surrender to CNN camera crews and empty tanks, and I realized then that the threat had been greatly exaggerated, and we had been misled on that. But it's just a real shame. But the problem is that our leaders become much more powerful, and they get on the TV interview programs and all these other things when there's a war going on, and so. But it's like I said, I think it's much more about the money and the power than it is about anything else.
Congressman John Duncan from Tennessee is on the Dude Maker hotline with us. Let me ask you a question. You say you're going back to the House of Representatives tomorrow.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you get, ladies and gentlemen are going to be, gentlemen and gentleladies are going to be asked to deal with is this fiscal cliff. So the first question that I have to ask is, it is being telegraphed by Republican members of the United States Senate that we have a revenue problem and that increased revenues are going to be part of any package to address this issue. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that's false. We've got a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem, and in fact, this fiscal cliff. The sequestration has been greatly exaggerated. It's always referred to as draconian, but draconian cuts. But what people don't mention is that these are cuts off of projected increases, and so they wouldn't be very dramatic or great cuts in the first place. And with a national debt of over $16 trillion, that's scheduled to go to over $20 trillion in the next 4 years under the most optimistic estimates, we have got to cut some spending, or we're going to mess up everything. We're not going to be able to pay people's Social Security and military pensions and things like that with money that will buy anything if we don't do much more than what we're scheduled or what they're attempting to do. Now the tax. What? Excuse me.
No. Go ahead. Finish your statement.
Well, when I would hear people in past years saying things like making the Bush tax cuts permanent, which I would like to make all those tax cuts permanent and much more. But no Congress can bind a future Congress, so we can't make any tax laws permanent. But I will tell you this: it's not about defending millionaires or billionaires. It's all about who is going to spend the money, and the most wasteful, inefficient, uneconomical way to spend money is to turn it over to the federal government.
Amen to that.
In fact, Governor Rendell, when he was mayor of Philadelphia, a very liberal Democrat, he was having trouble with city unions, and he testified years ago in front of the House Ways and Means Committee. He said, government does not work because it was not designed to. He said there's no incentive for people to save money, so much of it is squandered. There's no incentive for people to work hard, so many do not. And he really summed things up. I wish he'd followed some of his beliefs or his statement a little stronger than he did.
Congressman John Duncan is on the Dude Maker hotline with us, representing the 2nd District, I believe, in great state of Tennessee. You're in the Knoxville area, correct?
Yes, I sure am. In fact, if you want to talk about football, the colors orange and white are almost more patriotic where I'm from than red, white, and blue. So,
boy, aren't they? Let's switch gears, but we're kind of going to be on the same subject for just a moment.
Sure.
We were told that the last election was the most important election in the history of important elections, that if we did not depose the evil President Barack Obama, that great malady and harm would fall to our gentle republic, and that all things would go to the proverbial Hades in a handbasket, and that this was going to happen and that was going to happen. Well, the election has ended. President Obama was reelected. He now stands poised to, I guess, act upon some of the things that people fear that he's going to act upon. But what about the things that he's already done? Aren't there things that were done in the first term under the Obama administration when it comes to Libya is the last one, and I don't mean the Benghazi incident. I mean the use of military force without war authorization, that would, even if you don't want to pick off the president, isn't Mrs. Clinton, aren't some of the secretaries that discharge that action, aren't they worthy of, even if you don't want to impeach them, of some sort of a censure hearing?
Well, we're going to try and hold their feet to the fire, I guess, as much as possible. But what I'm worried about is that because of the election, some of our Republican colleagues are panicking way too early and saying that we've got to almost become Democrats light. And I think that's exactly the wrong way to go. In fact, I sent my first paycheck as a bag boy at the A&P grocery store in high school to the Barry Goldwater campaign, $19 and some odd cents. And we got slaughtered in that race, as you will remember. But
I do.
In the House, after that election, was 295 Democrats to 140 Republicans. But 2 years later, we picked up 48 seats in the House and 6 in the Senate and 8 governorships, including Ronald Reagan. And the biggest mistake we could make would be to panic now and say, oh, well, we've got to change totally and we've got to become more liberal and all the words open and inclusive and the words that they use. We've got to present an alternative to the Democrats, and the liberals will never come back. Yep.
Yeah. Does the alternative, though, include what was mostly made up, for example, the Romney campaign platform? there were things in that were part of the Romney campaign that were not that were part of the Republican platform. I'll give you one example. For the first time since 1996, I believe, the term gold standard was actually mentioned in the RNC platform. Governor Romney made hardly any mention of it whatsoever. He hardly ever talked monetary policy. Isn't the fiscal cliff and our fiscal melees at least partly to blame on the Federal Reserve and our reckless monetary policy? Wouldn't it be prudent for Republicans to gently begin urging their fellow citizens to return to gold?
Yes, I agree with you completely. In fact, when I first went to Congress, Congressman Paul wasn't in there, and the bill to audit the Federal Reserve was introduced several times by former Congressman Phil Crane of Illinois. And I co-sponsored that legislation way back, and it always bothered me that our people would say, well, we had to have a Federal Reserve to so we wouldn't have recessions and depressions. Well, my goodness, we've had more recessions and depressions since the Federal Reserve was created than we had before.
Right.
And I agree with you. The best way to protect our money and keep us from facing things like I mentioned a few minutes ago about our pensions and so forth becoming almost worthless is to return to a gold standard or non-inflationary policies.
What about Congressman Paul's idea of competing currencies? One of his last acts, I was just looking at his website today, was about one of the things that he most regretted that he was unable to do was to make any headway in even presenting that there could be just competing currency, which is, or I guess metals, which is legal under the Constitution. That's an alternative too, isn't it?
Well, it should be. It should be, and I think people would adjust to that a whole lot easier than they would to some major crash if we don't become much more fiscally conservative. But I will tell you, I had to tease Ron Paul a little bit though, because last year the National Taxpayers Union, they're the only group that rates us on all of our spending votes, and they rated 338 spending votes last year, and I ranked number one in the Congress, and I think beat him for the first time ever. But the only reason I beat him was that he missed a lot of votes because he was running for president. But I really admire his courage and his integrity. Congressman Duncan, John Duncan Jr. is on the Dude Maker hotline with us. Congressman Duncan, isn't it also true that one of the things that if you're going to talk demographics in the future of the Republican Party, is it one of the things that you can find that maybe we ought to get to the business of conserving is that the old Republican Party used to not, as John Quincy Adams said, go in search of monsters to destroy. The conservative position was always one that we were just another humble resident or a humble nation state in the League of Nations or in the world, and that we should mind our own affairs and not meddle in other people's. Seems to me that young people today you can't go anywhere without finding young people that are wearing peace symbols around their necks. My daughters have them, and are not doing the peace sign when they're photographed. The word peace is on their tongue, yet they don't seem to find the word peace very much in Republican literature or propaganda. You think that that's a mistake and something that's got to be addressed? I sure do. In fact, when I was a teenager, I remember reading, or maybe I was in college, I remember reading something from the Republican National Committee, and they said Democrats start wars, Republicans end them. But when they found out I was was leaning against voting for this war in Iraq, they called me and three other members down to the White House and put us in a little secured room with no windows and all, with Condoleezza Rice, George Tenet, who was the head of the CIA, and John McLaughlin, who was his second in command. And they told us all this stuff that they had, and I said to them, I said, well, if you can get past the traditional conservative position of being against massive foreign aid, and if you can get past the traditional conservative position of being against huge deficit spending, and if you can get past the traditional conservative position of being against world government, and the traditional conservative position of being the biggest critics of the UN, and this would be a war to enforce UN resolutions. I said, if you can get past all those traditional conservative positions, I said, do you have any evidence of any imminent threat? And they didn't. And George Tenet confirmed that in his first speech at Georgetown University the day after he left he resigned as head of the CIA. This foreign policy has gone against every traditional conservative, traditional Republican position that I've ever known. And, it's really a shame. In fact, I'm convinced that, about 80% of the Republicans in the House oppose the bombings in Bosnia. And I'm convinced that many Republicans would have opposed the war in Iraq if it had been started by President Gore instead of a President Bush.
But alas, it was not, and now we're stuck with it. Congressman John Duncan is on the Dude Maker hotline with us. We only have a few minutes left. Let me delve a little deeper into the upcoming Congress. You're going to have, I believe, 234 seats?
Right. Mm-hmm.
234. You're going to outnumber, substantially outnumber the Democrat Party. Talk for a moment with you. And by the way, there are other good guys that are that join you. In addition to Congressman Jones, there's Congressman Justin Amash of Michigan.
Yes, he's great. He's got a great future ahead of him. In fact, a lot of people say that he will be the next Ron Paul, and he certainly could be.
He could be. Well, I've met him, and he is a very tempered, very mild-mannered, very gentlemanly young man. He's very impressive, and everything I've ever seen him do. He's very thoughtful, and he's very statesmanlike, as are you, sir, which is impressive. But let's go down the list a little further. My buddy, and someone I am privileged to call a dear friend, Congressman Gohmert.
Yes, he's another good friend of mine. Louis Gohmert's great. I was a criminal court judge for 7.5 years trying the felony criminal cases here in Knoxville, and before I came to Congress, and he was also a judge doing the same thing.
Yes, he was. Congressman Massey is incoming. You have a nice nucleus there. Traditional, what I would call traditional conservatism and old school republicanism with a capital R.
Right.
Talk for a moment, if you will, about what it is that if you guys were in the leadership, or if you could convince the leadership, which I doubt that you can, but I know you're going to try. What would you do to try and stop the president, to try and stop the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, to try and stop any future bailouts, to try and stop the Energy Department from giving money away it has no legal authority to do? What would you gentlemen do?
Well, the main thing is not to fund all those departments and agencies and that legislation. In fact, that's really our main tool if we would use it. But what as I said a few moments ago, I'm afraid that we may cave in on some of those things. But I'm really impressed that you are up on some of these names. Congressman Massey, who's brand new from Kentucky, he called me Saturday afternoon, late Saturday afternoon. I had a nice conversation with him, so I'm getting to know him. But I'll tell you, though, let me just mention a couple other things. I know you're running out of time, but I got my undergraduate degree in journalism before I went to law school, but I took almost all my electives in history. And I really admire your passion for history and the things that you cover in that regard. But when I was driving in a few minutes ago, you were talking about religious and moral people, and you made me think of Senator Moynihan. Daniel Patrick Moynihan said several years ago, he said, we've been defining deviancy down, accepting as a part of life what we once found repugnant. And that's a great quote if you think about it. And then I also thought when I was listening to you a few minutes ago, you talked about what we've lost. I was not alive in 1939, but they said the nation was shocked when Clark Gable said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn."
Yes, they were.
And it's sad, but we've almost lost the ability to be shocked.
Well, I watching what we watch on television today, or what some of us watch, or some people watch. Now we have lost the ability to. This is a race to extreme vulgarities, and vulgarities. You get the term vulgarity. There used to be ordinances in almost all the states against vulgar behavior. They would lock you up. And now this is in the land of the free and the mobile home of the brave, Congressman.
Right.
There were laws against indecency. What?
My wife has told me for years that I still live in Andy of Mayberry days, and about 3 or 4 years ago, I saw I saw in the paper that I had the same birthday as Don Knotts. Barney Fife and I have the same birthday, so when I saw that, I thought, well, maybe she's been right all these years. Anyway.
Well, and I think one of the other things, and we'll have one more little discussion. You mentioned when you first came on, Congressman John Duncan Jr. of the great state of Tennessee is on the Dude Maker hotline with us. You had mentioned when you first came on that you contributed to the American Conservative magazine, and my friend Daniel McCarthy is a grand editor. Yeah. Rick Allison has done a fantastic job at that magazine. You also mentioned Chronicles.
Right.
Not enough of you people are reading Chronicles. I mean, Chronicles, Fleming, Mr. Fleming runs, Richard Fleming runs, is Richard Fleming?
Tom Fleming.
He's, right. He's the editor of Chronicles. And what you find in Chronicles magazine is probably what you would have found in a conservative magazine in 1958. And what is just striking to me, and I continue to just be amazed that we don't pick up on this, and there are so few of us that do pick up on it. And I must admit, I find myself tempted by the allure of the modern, and it's okay to be modern. There's nothing wrong inherently with being modern, but you cannot be modern at the expense of being contemptuous of the past. And when you read a magazine like Chronicles, you'll be in between stories, and it'll be one white page with about 35 words smack dab in the middle of it, and it's what we used to call poetry.
Right.
And I read the poetry, and I just think to myself, okay, I'm probably the only, quote, conservative, end quote, that's on radio or television that actually reads the magazine, reads the poem 2 or 3 times and goes, that's interesting. One of the things we've lost, as I think, in the discussion of the things we've lost, and I don't think that there's anything that you can do as a member of Congress, but as a member of your church that you're a deacon in, or an elder in, there's certainly something you can do in your community, is to try and restore that thirst for that kind of knowledge in our youth, don't you think?
Well, I agree with you. And in fact, I've heard you mention Dr. Russell Kirk on there, and I read his autobiography, Sword of the Imagination. That's a great book. And then I'm reading right now a book by Justin Raimondo called Reclaiming the American Right, in which he talks about the old right. You mentioned how we've gotten away from the traditional Republican, traditional conservative views. He talks about men like Garrett and John Flynn and others in the old traditional small government right. Now our party and our seems to be dominated, and certainly was during the last couple of Republican administrations, by so-called neoconservatives, who big government conservatives, which I don't think there really is such a thing. And so I agree with you. I think you're exactly right. And there are a lot of things that are outside the scope of politics and government, and go back to morals and traditional values.
Well, and it's something that each individual has to work on themselves, and that's the challenge. It's not a political challenge.
That's exactly right.
Personal one. All right, that's all the time we have.
Yep.
Congressman John Duncan Jr. of the 2nd District in Tennessee. You'll come back and visit us again?
I sure will. I've got a bad cold this morning, but I'll tell you, it's been a real honor to be on your program.
Well, Congressman Duncan, Mr. Duncan, sir, the honor has been all mine, my friend. I will wish you great success and Godspeed on your endeavors in the House of Representatives. And as soon as you get to D.C., we'll have you back on and we'll talk again real soon.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. That is Congressman John Duncan Jr. there.